Longview, Washington. An elk, an adult female elk, lifted out of the forest of the state of Washington before 14 witnesses at about 1 minute before noon. We have reported that. I've had witnesses on multiple radio programs talking about that case.
I was told was the crew was out planting trees. About noon, they looked up and saw what they thought it was a parachute coming down. But as they got closer to the ground, it stopped and started doing some maneuvering, which got the attention of more of the crew members, and they were standing there within 500 yards. They noticed it was a machine rather than a parachute after a little bit. It went over, there was a herd of elk in the clear cut next to them, and it went over, hovered above the elk, and actually picked one of them up and took it, I'm assuming, into the machine. They said it then acted like the weight of that thing was almost too much for them. And it started wobbling, trying to gain altitude. It was moving over towards the edge of the clear cut, and they thought it was going to crash into the trees, but it stopped, moved back over into the middle of the clear cut, hovered for a minute, and went out of sight vertical.
And it took the elk with it, did it?
Yeah.
And when did this occur, please? Do you happen to know?
The exact date I don't. It was, I believe, Thursday.
I was amused to see Grant Cameron last hour play that advertisement showing the bison being lifted out of his group of 3 by a disc, because virtually the same thing occurred in Washington State back in February of 1999. 14 witnesses. It would stand up in any court of law. 14 witnesses saw a disc move towards a herd of elk and lift one of them out of the forest, fly off with it. We later found that elk. Here are some. Bob Fairfax, who is the current Director of Investigations for MUFON in the state of Washington, I used to occupy that role. We went out and investigated this case. We found the elk, and what we think was the elk, there was not a wound on it. Ruben Uriarty and Bob followed up with a second investigation, interviewed the forestry workers who had seen this thing, who reported it to us. It was a dramatic case. If anybody's interested in getting more information about it, call Ruben and ask him to give some more details on what it was that they found there.
It is a fascinating story. I find this one particularly alarming, Art, and I think our listeners tonight will get a feeling of that. Why don't I start off, Bob, with just a brief introduction of what happened. Maybe you can fill in the blanks, and then we'll play about a 77-second tape of the first report we got about this just about 2 weeks ago.
All right.
But in a nutshell, what happened is this. On Thursday, the 25th of February, 1999, about 2 or 3 minutes before noon, a group of forestry workers in the state of Washington, not far from the Mount St. Helens, which blew its top out here a couple decades ago, 3 of those workers saw what at first they thought was a parachute drifting over the ridge to the south of them and drifting into the valley of to the north of their location. They were out doing forestry work, which they've done for a decade or decade and a half, many of them in that area. They were astonished by this thing. The first 3 to see the object quickly called the attention of their co-workers to it, and they watched that object for, they estimate, 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes. And the long and the short of it is that object drifted towards a herd of elk, and it was seen by 14 witnesses, allegedly, to pick one of the adult elk off the ground, pick it up out of the forest, and do a circle with it, and then start rising faster and faster and faster, and it disappeared from their sight to the northeast.
They abducted an elk?
A fully grown adult elk, apparently, and it flew off to the northeast. Apparently the object, and I'm going to let Bob fill in some of the details that I've skipped over here. Apparently the object, after it picked up the elk, started slowly trying to gain altitude, apparently, and as it got higher, this elk apparently got closer and closer to the bottom of the disc, and by the time the object was above the observers, they could no longer see the elk.
It's like it had some kind of tractor beam on the elk. In other words, could they see a beam of anything?
No, they didn't see a beam, and it appeared that the hull may have even come in contact with the top of the head before the elk started disappearing into the bottom of the craft.
How big was the craft, Bob?
The craft wasn't much bigger than the elk. The elk is, we're talking about a 500-pound animal.
Oh, that's pretty big.
Yeah, it stands 4.5 feet at the shoulder and about 6.5 feet from nose to tail.
Now, this is a pretty wild story, folks. Let's go back to the beginning. How many people, pray tell, saw this?
14 witnesses, Art.
14 witnesses.
And we were able to interview 3 of them. And, of course, a good investigator is always skeptical.
Yes.
Particularly in a case like this where you're being told just absolutely incredible things. But Bob and I, just a week ago tomorrow afternoon, met with 3 of those 14 witnesses. And I'll let Bob speak for his own part, but my impression of the people we met with, the people who were involved with this case, are as sober-minded and modest and soft-spoken, perhaps even self-effacing a group of people as you'll ever run across.
They didn't want any publicity, I take it.
They want absolutely no publicity. That's part of the reason I'm pleased to have 2 of us on this phone tonight describing what happened.
Yes, you were both there.
It is very difficult to believe. If you would permit me, I would like to play about a 77-second cut.
Absolutely.
Of the first report we got. This first came in actually this is a brief conversation I had with a gentleman. This came in on the 1st of March, just about 3 or 4 days after the event, after it had been preliminarily investigated by some of the people who were involved.
But this is what put you onto it?
This is the conversation I had a week ago, actually, that first put us on it, and Bob and I were on the road at about 9:30 the next morning, Friday morning,
all right,
just a week ago, headed to the site. But let me play this cut. It's about 70 seconds long.
Okay,
here we go.
Go ahead.
I was told was the crew was out planting trees. About noon, they looked up and saw what they thought it was a parachute coming down. But as they got closer to the ground, it stopped and started doing some maneuvering, which got the attention of more of the crew members, and they were standing there within 500 yards of they noticed it was a machine rather than a parachute after a little bit. It went over, there was a herd of elk in the clear cut next to them, and it went over, hovered above the elk, and actually picked one of them up and took it, I'm assuming, into the machine. They said it then acted like the weight of that thing was almost too much for them. And it started wobbling, trying to gain altitude. It was moving over towards the edge of the clear cut, and they thought it was going to crash into the trees, but it stopped, moved back over into the middle of the clear cut, hovered for a minute, and went out of sight vertical.
And it took the elk with it, did it?
Yeah.
And when did this occur, please? Do you happen to know?
The exact date I don't. It was, I believe, Thursday.
All right, so that started you out. I can see how that would get you going, all right.
Yeah.
Smokes.
I at first didn't believe it.
Yeah, I hear you.
But it was coming from people with whom we've met now, and they're as sober-minded a group of people as you'll meet.
Well, let's talk about who they are. Bob, who are these witnesses? 14 people seeing this. That's pretty impressive. Now, what kind of witnesses are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about people that were scared by this event as much as the elk herd was scared. Apparently, they were both huddling after the event. Not together, but in separate groups. The impression I got was that they didn't want to jeopardize their jobs by talking about it.
Then how did you get them to talk?
They were willing to talk to us in a special fashion, I will say. These people really, really do not want any publicity, and that is sort of an interesting aspect. That from my vantage point, I think Bob would probably agree, that is a very good sign. These people do not have any kind of agenda they apparently are trying to fulfill. They would not even allow us to photograph them, and there are certain aspects of our interview that we probably should just gloss over here and not mention at all. But they took a day off. It was their day off when we interviewed them, and they assembled and drove some distance to meet with us to share with us firsthand what it was that they allegedly had seen just about 8 days earlier. And it was interesting to watch them interact with one another. We interviewed them together for a host of reasons. Generally, you like to interview people separately. We did it together for a host of reasons, and it was very interesting to see how each of them amplified what the other one would say.
Were you taping?
We did tape, yes.
Yes, we did.
You did tape. But obviously, for obvious reasons, we can't put that on the air.
Right.
Yep, we
do look for certain signs and things that we know are common, but most witnesses don't know about. And one of them was that the craft wobbled. It wobbled before, it picked the creature up, it wobbled afterwards, and it wobbled in an interesting fashion. It oscillated around all points of the compass, like a wave motion traveling around the circumference, which is typical of reports that we get with video, for instance. It's a very strange and peculiar type of movement.
All right, question. You remember the video, the now famous or infamous, I'm not sure which it is, Mexico City video of the wobbling UFO that goes behind the buildings?
Right. Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah. Apparently so. It was wobbling slowly as it approached the elk, according to the witnesses. And as you heard this gentleman just comment in this tape I just played, after it picked the animal up, it was almost as if it was overgrossed, as though it had too much weight, and it started wobbling in a much more pronounced fashion. And what people described to us, I found to be very reminiscent of that tape from Mexico City called the Las Lamitas tape. Jaime Masson, who I know has been a guest on your program, described it and described his new evidence in that case, and it's rather convincing.
Well, certainly the interview with the little girl who saw it, independent of any tape or any knowledge, that was extremely convincing,
yes,
despite the best debunking efforts of the confirmation program. So the two of you, I mean, 14 witnesses, that's really incredible. You might get a couple of people, maybe even 3, to concoct a story, but not, I don't think 14, and particularly under the conditions of we don't want anything, we really don't want to talk to you, and we certainly don't want our pictures taken, and you don't have permission to play the tape.
Yeah. 14 witnesses is pretty good, Art. And
anybody have any idea what they might want with an elk?
Well, of course, there are all the mutilation cases. And we had heard that there was, and we did examine a dead elk that was not too far, maybe 20 minutes from the site. However, there were no marks at all. It looked like a healthy but dead elk.
Yeah, it was a very mysterious situation. If I can jump in there, Bob.
Yeah, go ahead.
Bob examined it more than I did, although we were standing, I mean, just 2 feet from this animal. A very healthy, well-fed, pregnant female elk. No broken bones, no bullet wound. We rolled her over with another gentleman who is very experienced in these matters. We could find no overt sign of injury, bullet hole, or anything. And it is common for wild animals to die, of course.
Is it your hypothesis, gentlemen, that you examined possibly the elk that had been taken up?
Well, we don't know that.
I understand. I'm just asking if that...
It's one of the possibilities. The other possibility, other than natural death, would be that perhaps radiation from the craft could have affected another elk that was nearby. This wasn't the only dead elk found. There was another one, a yearling, which we didn't get a chance to examine at another spot. So we don't know.
Did either one of you come away from the interview of these 3 with any doubts about the story?
No doubts.
No doubts.
No doubt worth mentioning in my case either. These people are sincere, intelligent, eloquent people who were unsettled by what they allegedly had seen. They had no particular desire. We had to round them up. It took some effort to get them rounded up over the course of the day to meet with us. They're responsible enough individuals that they recognize the value of this information. They did meet with us. It was a very matter-of-fact, factual interview. Yeah.
And again, the craft itself was barely larger than the elk. Is that so? So it wasn't that big?
No.
One of the things that they commented on, this is a very interesting point. Maybe you can amplify on this too, Bob. They commented that the object was not much larger in diameter, and it was disc-shaped. Clearly disc-shaped is the impression I got from them. It was not much bigger than the elk itself, as Bob has mentioned, but when it picked up the elk, their impression was that the object increased in its dimension. It got bigger.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
It morphed, or it grew, literally, to accommodate the bulk or the size of the elk.
We can't guarantee that. There could have been optical illusion. There are a lot of things involved in this case. Speaking for my own part, speaking for the National UFO Reporting Center and Peter Davenport, I do not speak for MUFON. Bob would have that privilege. But I find this case to be alarming. It is a landmark case. Regrettably, we do not have a photograph. We do not have anything that I would construe to be hard proof.
Well, 14 witnesses is pretty good for me.
Yes.
Bob, how would you classify this case in the cases that you have investigated in Washington?
Well, I've never come across an elk abduction before. Mutilations are fairly rare. I've had some, mostly on the eastern side of the mountains, involving cattle. And, of course, just north of us in B.C., there was a rash of cat mutilations.
This elk apparently was actually seen by these witnesses to be in midair below the craft and then slowly rising to it?
Yes, when the craft approached the herd scattered up the hill to the east.
Right.
One of the elk separated from the herd, and that's the one that the UFO grabbed. Now, once it had the elk, the witnesses couldn't see the elk kicking or any movement other than a slow rotation of the elk underneath the craft.
A rotation?
Yeah.
It was sort of frozen, but turning slowly?
Yes. And then also it seemed to be disappearing up into the hull, though there wasn't any opening that was described.
That was an interesting part of their testimony or their statement. They were looking down. We estimate about 280 feet vertical elevation difference between the observers and the UFO that was below them. So they were looking at the top of the object when it was going after the elk.
Oh, now that too is really different. Wow.
Yeah.
This is a major incident we are discussing with 14 witnesses of truly non-trivial matter. The apparent abduction of an elk in a craft, seen by 14 witnesses. And gentlemen, a couple of more questions. You said that the witnesses were looking down, so they actually saw the top of the craft. They saw all this from above. That's unusual by itself. How far away, about, from the craft when it got to the elk were the witnesses? How far away?
Why don't you take that, Bob?
Well, we got an estimate of about 350 to 400 yards.
Okay.
So it's a distance, and you can't see detail at that distance.
3 or 4 football fields.
One interesting point, the reason the craft made a 360 circle, we think, is because the elk wasn't completely inside when it hit the tree line. We think that some of the witnesses think that the elk may have hit the top of the trees, and then the craft wobbled a bunch and backed up basically and did a 360 spiral to clear the trees before it went vertical.
And then once it went vertical, it took off at great speed, or?
No, it was fairly slow throughout. It never hovered. It basically maintained a steady speed and eventually disappeared in the cloud cover. It just rose and rose and rose along the eastern or western facing slope, and then it got steeper and steeper and just went out of their sight, disappeared into the sky to the northeast. That's what they reported to us. It is an astonishing story, in my opinion, Art.
Well, anytime you have 14 people who saw the same thing, you've got to stop and think real hard about it. And so this, it calls to mind a million questions. Why such a small craft? Why an elk? What would they do with an elk? Who are they? Was it a guided craft? Was it a robotic craft? Sounds like it might have been a robotic craft, but who the hell knows?
Yeah, it's very difficult to answer those questions. Bob and I think, are frustrated immensely by this case because we don't have a photograph. If we had a photograph of this one, I think it would change the complexion of ufology dramatically. But these guys were out there planting trees. They didn't think that they would see something like that. They didn't have a camera. One of the things that they reported to us is very interesting. They noted that as Bob reported earlier, the herd of elk after this incident regrouped in the same area and stayed very close to one another. Noticeably closer, they reported, and they were able to compare because they had been watching the animals throughout that morning down in the valley below them.
Okay, isn't that the behavior of a group of elk or a herd of elk? Wouldn't it be similar if a predator had taken one? Wouldn't the elk then sort of gather closer for protection of the unit?
I believe so.
Yeah, I'm not a large animal biologist. It's very difficult for me to say, but that seems reasonable. Of course it does. Interestingly, the workers themselves stayed very close to one another throughout that day. They clearly were unsettled by this incident and apparently talked about it profusely among themselves, and they were even put in touch with people with more authority in that area. We don't want to identify them and describe their story to...
We don't want to get them fired is what it comes down to.
They don't want to be identified. None of the people involved in this case wish to be identified.
Bob, how long have you been an investigator for MUFON?
About 7 years.
7 years. Well, anything either one of you want to add to this one that we haven't covered?
Hopefully we can uncover something else. We are planning on talking to some more witnesses if that's possible.
Yeah. One thing I might add, Art, when we were examining this dead female elk, we actually examined the dead elk before we went to the site of the alleged incident. I noticed that this animal had ticks on it. When you ran your hand through the fur of the animal, it had dead ticks on its neck.
Dead ticks?
Dead ticks. Now, my experience with ticks is that when an animal dies and starts getting cool, the ticks generally will leave the animal. These ticks appeared to be still clinging to the animal. The animal was first seen on the 1st of March, Monday morning.
And the ticks were dead?
The ticks were dead.
Now, again, I'm not an animal person, and you're not either, but I wonder if that's normal.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to do is talk to an entomologist and a large animal biologist to find out if anything is known about the migration of ticks after an animal has died. But there was no mark on this animal. It makes me wonder whether the ticks and the animal might have been killed by the same cause, let's call it. But it is a very interesting case.
We also noted that there weren't any scavengers that had attacked the carcass.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, the people who went out with us, or the person who went out with us, is very experienced with these animals, and he noted that as well. It seems unusual that this animal would lie for at least 5 days, maybe more like 9 days.
I'd say impossible.
Yeah.
I live here in Pahrump, Nevada, and, there's a gazillion rabbits. And when a rabbit is hit by a car, you can't count 24 hours before all signs of that rabbit, save a little discoloration on the road, are gone. The birds pick it apart inside of 24 hours without fail.
Yeah.
And that's how it works here. Now, it's absolutely unreasonable that anything after 8 or 9 days would not have been...
Yeah. We did run across a porcupine, too, as we were driving back from this carcass, and the porcupine had been picked clean. Its ribs were sticking out. But that animal was totally untouched by any kind of predator, birds or any kind of scavenger.
You know, I realize that both of you are investigators, but would either one of you like to conjecture anything about this? Or is that asking too much of an investigator?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's asking too much because there's just too many unknowns.
Well, I guess we'll leave it to everybody in the audience to conjecture then.
Yeah. I'm hard put to go any further than we've gone because we've just run headlong into the barrier of the information we have. We don't have any more. We don't have any proof. All we have is statements from individuals, although, again, seemingly very reliable individuals. The only other thing I can add, Art, is that I have never seen this volume of UFO reports as what I've seen in the last couple of months, and even recently. And there's been a cluster of reports just in the last 2 weeks, I would say, from all over the country. In fact, we had a major sighting out in the Midwest tonight. I gather we have some listeners out in the Chicago area. Major sighting in Lamont, Illinois tonight, and minutes later, the object apparently was seen down in Sandusky, Ohio area.
Ohio. Well, listen, at this point, I think we'll say thank you to Bob. Bob, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I understand how Peter feels. Coming on the air with a story like this without some support would be a very uncomfortable thing to do.
Well, thank you, Art.
And so thank you for coming on, and take care.
All right.